Welcome to Human Powered, the podcast about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. I'm Trenton Moss, leadership coach, exited agency founder, and author of the book Human Powered. And on my podcast, my guests spill their secrets about how they've created high-performing teams and how this has translated into running a high-performing business. And today I've got Ian Millner, co-founder and global chair at the marketing agency Iris. Ian, thank you so much for joining me today.
How are you doing? Good to be here.
So around 25 years ago, you and a few of your mates were sitting around in your kitchen and thought, should we start our own marketing agency? And fast forward, 25 years to now, you were the CEO of that business for around 20 years. You've grown it to around 1,000 people across 17 countries. Obviously big global marketing agency, working with big brands, Samsung, Adidas, Bentley, and so on and so on. You're now the global chair. More recently, you've started investing in other businesses outside of Iris. So what a story. What an incredible journey you must have been on. So I'm really excited to delve into how you did this. You've had, really high-performing business to grow it in such a way, and I'm assuming high-performing teams to get there. So yeah, tell us, Ian, what's the secret?
So I don't think there's any secret, and I don't think there's any kind of rocket science, silver bullet, or anything that sounds technical and macho and involving liftoff or anything. I think it's lots of hard work. I think it's about surrounding yourself with really good people that you like, trust, enjoy spending lots of time with. It's also about having an alignment, a sort of sense of we're all on this together. And I think that as I've kind of gone on through my career and I now look back on it, I appreciate that more than I did at the time. And I can also see that it's really different what we had. And it's something that you can't fully explain to anyone. You can't really codify it. I don't think you can even describe it as a high performing team either. I think it's just cultural. It's just a sort of coming together and meeting of minds. And I don't think you can kind of recreate it either, because it's not only about the chemistry of the people, it's also about the chemistry of the time. It was a moment. So it makes it really difficult to replicate it and also to explain it. Obviously, what you can do, of course, is pull it apart a little bit and post-rationalize it. But you certainly couldn't just do it again if you got the same people together again, because things have changed, times have changed. But I think the idea of a high-performing team, I think that's worth us pausing to talk about, really, because all really young, mid-late 20s, very little experience, obviously okay about working hard, like to have fun, we were attractive to clients, that sort of chemistry. You can see it, and clients like it. They gravitate towards it. That sort of sense of what the fuck. It becomes part of your brand, both your personal brand and your agency brand, and it also creates lots of loyalty. It's also attractive to lots and lots of talent, and I suppose it was a sort of performing team because it was so cultural and exciting, and it created a high growth company. But it wouldn't be like a high-performing team. If you got some HR expert in, they wouldn't be able to say. There was no structure to it. There was no KPI, OKRs, I suppose they're called these days, aren't they? And also, it wasn't particularly rational either. It wasn't like achieve this, get that. But here's a bonus. It was nothing particularly conventional. It was all cultural. Perhaps that in itself is the big idea, really. If you are building a leadership team and an agency team that is more culturally charged than KPI charged, then that might be a learning in its own right. But I'd rather suspect, if you walked around the market, all the really good agencies will have a similar sort of story, really, where it was just a sort of moment in time, and it felt more like chemistry and culture than anything else.
That's great. That's lovely to hear. The phrase that's springing to mind for me is "culture eats strategy for breakfast."
Well, we all love a bit of breakfast. I've always I've never really understood that phrase, but I think that probably is right, isn't it? It's like it's personality, chemistry, charisma, drive, passion, enthusiasm. These are the things that enable humans to achieve more when they all kind of come together at a moment in time, so that they can be channeled towards some kind of goal, whether that's a written down goal or not. And in our case, it wasn't written down. We were just having a go, and it was this sort of sense of, who says you can't, and it was about proving ourselves, and that made it, it obviously made it exciting. It made it kind of about us and our personalities, and about us, coming together as a team. And yeah, it's very, very difficult to talk about and explain to someone.
I think you're doing a great job of explaining it. That makes complete sense. You were a group of a young group, and you bonded. You had that chemistry together, which therefore created that culture. Now, that does make total sense to me, what you described, especially when you're a small team. But you grew this to an enormous size. So tell me a bit about how do you maintain that culture and that chemistry as you start scaling into a large global business?
Yeah, so there was 7 of us at the start, and one of the founding principles was this sort of sense of we're in it together, and we didn't have a view around hierarchy. It wasn't about any one or two of us getting really, really wealthy. We had a belief that we needed to share the ownership, both literally and just in terms of how it felt to people, so that it felt like it was their company as well. Obviously Iris it's not like named after anybody. It's about future and looking ahead, and so what we did kind of beyond the first founding group was we were always really keen to share ownership. So as we grew as a company, we probably found ourselves with possibly 50 other shareholders, and that is unusual. What I've seen in my career is normally is like 4, 5, 6 tops shareholders. So we had a lot of shareholders, and that brings with it all sorts of positives. Clients are never far away from somebody who owns the company and has got a real say in what the company does and how what the company thinks. It also meant that people were more motivated, because as we scaled, obviously the company became more and more valuable, and even if people have a relatively small amount of equity, that turned out to be pretty valuable for people. What was also good about that was it allowed you to make decisions. We could talk really openly and honestly about what was going on in the company, because these were all shareholders, so we had to. So we could share information and be very transparent. That created very strong loyalty and motivation. If we needed to change anything, we could change it really quickly. There wasn't any of the usual, what you find in a big company that is more corporate in its setting. You've got to really think through individuals and what's in it for them, and their own personal kind of situations and their own personal plans. We didn't have very motivated. We are passion companies. It's about discretionary talent, and you want people to bring that passion to the workplace. And if they do that all the time, then you find that you win more. It's also intoxicating. Other talent wants to work there, because they think, well, I want to be part of that team. the team that's full of beans and winning stuff all the time and being all excited at award shows. So again, it's a sort of a really interesting cocktail that creates a sort of high growth company. And again, quite hard. If we were in a private equity conversation, it's quite hard to break that down into something that they would particularly want to invest in.
I think one of the core principles that you're saying is about that shared ownership and making, I think you said, up to 50 partners in the business who deeply buy into the business and are committed for the long term. Ian, tell me a bit more about the culture. So you talk quite a bit about the kind of chemistry that you started with and the culture that you created, and you're scaling this in part by giving people equity so they're bought in for the long term. Can you describe some of the core principles underpinning the culture?
Yeah, I think it's worth just pausing a second because I don't think we were scaling it. I think it was scaling us. And kind of over and above kind of sharing ownership and making the company feel, exciting to be in. One of the big things has always been backing people with ideas, backing, whether that's their business. So Iris has given birth to lots of other businesses over the years, and some of those businesses we invested in, either as the company or as shareholders individually. Thinking about, there's that game called Linky that got on Dragon's Den as big potato games. That was all started in Iris's creative department, and it was a couple of the creative guys set it up, and there was a graduate trainee called Dean who then started to work with them, and then a few people invested in it, and it's become a global games company, and it's it's brilliant. And that's the sort of spirit we had, where we were just backing ideas and backing people. But also, I remember really clearly when we started to expand around the world, just some people just held up their hand and said, "Oh, I'd quite like to do that." And I remember Dan Saxby, he was one of our key people working on our biggest client, Sony Ericsson, wanted to go out to Asia to set up a business. So we backed him, took some time, gave him some funding, gave him a laptop, gave him our best wishes. Obviously, we helped him open up some doors out there, and then before we knew it, Iris Singapore was up and running, and Dan was running it. And then whilst he was there, he also went on to open up Sydney and Delhi. Just was the sort of strength of his sort of entrepreneurial fervour. When you look around our story, it is full of incredibly talented entrepreneurial people like that, who had passion, who had drive, and all we did was give them the opportunity, get out of the way, provide them with the support that they needed when they needed it, and it certainly enabled a company like us with very humble beginnings to become a very, very successful, truly global, award-winning company that's capable of working across lots of different markets with some of the biggest and most ambitious clients in the world.
So you're working with really big brands, but that entrepreneurial spirit is at the core.
I think so, yeah. But I think the key is it's about the talent. It's about what they want from it. There is a lot of talk these days about employer branding and employee value propositions. The meaning of all that work is all about people asking the question, "What's in it for me?" So it's that deal that the people have that makes it worth their while bringing their passion in, bringing their real time and real commitment in. And I think we knew that instinctively as we were building Iris, but what we didn't do was, turn it into something rational or a line on a page or something. It was coded into the culture and the expectations that we had and the people who were joining Iris had. And obviously the rubber hits the road around equity, I think, and because we were always very early to show people how they could create some value out of their journey within Iris. I think that also added to the cocktail, so that nobody was kind of constantly asking one another for more money or whatever. It was all about them getting on with things and following their passions and dreams.
Yeah, giving people the autonomy to move things forward and to do things, as you're saying, that they feel passionate about. So how does that work in a big business, Ian? I'm curious. So you're allowing people to be entrepreneurial, to drive things forward in the way that works for them. Don't you also need like an overarching vision for the company so that there's a shared destination that everyone's heading towards?
I think so. I think, and this is one of the big debates that we've had over the years. And it's like, which is the most important thing, the journey or the destination? And I instinctively believe that you need a bit of both, but you need more of one than the other. And it might change over time. I think you do need destiny because you need purpose. If you've got a load of people with promises around equity, it's like, okay, at some point you've got to fulfill those obligations so that people carry on believing it and they don't feel like you're just taking the piss out of them or just kicking the can down the road all the time. And a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs I've met over the years have told me how often they are let down but by promises around equity and the like. And we didn't do that. We took our obligations to our shareholders very seriously and worked really hard to work in partnership with them to make sure that everybody could understand what their equity was worth and when it was going to be worth that money. And of course, things happen, and you don't. I don't think we achieved 100% of that, but we certainly got to like 80-90% of that, and that for most people was a really good result. But I think that I think we achieved a sort of value event. I have to say, roughly 20 years it was that we managed to achieve that. But I think the journey. What I've now looking back on believe is that the journey is so powerful and so important, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier on about culture and passion, and people need to believe that they are doing the best work of their lives and having the time of their lives. That they need to believe that in order for the company to be a high growth, exciting and competitive business. So I think whilst I think you need both things. I think you need to sort of be managing them at the same time and prioritizing one over the other and changing those priorities as the business changes and as the business matures.
It's really interesting what you're saying, Ian, because so many business advisors are constantly talking about the importance of the vision, the importance of the destination. And what you're saying is, yeah, that's important. The journey is as important, potentially more important at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think quite often the investment world drives at a destination because it means value event, and quite often it's about achieving a value event within a certain time frame. The problem is life is just not that simple, and things change. You lose a client, or something happens in a certain market so you've got to make it sustainable, so that everybody's happy to do it for long enough. You've also got to make it just feel exciting and differentiated, and I think that matters more than having a very, very clear sense of vision. I think the category that we're in also is quite interesting in that regard, because I mean, it's very hard to be different. I mean, it's about being distinctive, if anything. And distinctivity is really about the sort of myth and legend of your brand and your business, and that sort of intoxicating sense of, what everyone can do together. And I've always had this view that it really is about, it's about adventure. It's about adventure and spirit, and doing cool and exciting things, because that powers everybody up, keeps everyone energized and excited, and enables people to do it for longer. If it starts to feel stodgy and repetitive and just about the money, you just know that you can only really do that for a short period.
So I just want to bottom line some of the things you're saying here, because I think there's so much good stuff here. So again, we're talking about the journey being so important and the culture that you create. And for you, obviously, a culture filled with entrepreneurial spirit is key. And to achieve that, you give people equity. You make sure that your brand is distinctive. You try and make sure everything feels exciting and a bit differentiated, and keep doing kind of those cool and exciting things.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
For people listening who are running their own agencies and look at what you've achieved and think, wow, I want to do that. What other top tips have you got to help people move in the direction that you've just talked about?
I think it's got to be your journey. It's not, you can't cut and paste someone else's, because it's so much of it's about who you're doing it with. So you've got to have a team that you trust and you like spending time with, and you've also got to have a team that's motivated and up for it, as long as you are. I think that matters more than anything, and I think it's also about you all knowing why you're doing it. So when we started as early youngsters, the reason why is proving a point. It was a chip. We had chips on our shoulder, and it was who says you can't. It was more dare than truth, and that created that spirit that we talked about. But it also created freedom. We were making it all up as we went along. Really, no particular serious strategy other than to have a good culture. So I think if you then, well, what does that mean then to other entrepreneurs? Well, I think they've all got to know why they're doing it, what the team around them is in it for, because it's not like there's a right or wrong here either. I'm describing what we did. For other people, that it's totally valid for it to be more destination than journey. It's totally reasonable. In fact, that's what most businesses do. And probably, in our journey, we probably ought to have had a bit more of a tune in to the destination than the journey, because we would have probably, made more money. Again, not that was the main driver, but I think we probably undervalued ourselves. So I think the main thing is like having a plan. A lot of businesses, most businesses that I've come into contact with over the years, they don't actually have a plan. They're just doing it, and it's year to year, and quite rarely, in fact, do they go, oh well, what in 3 years we want to be X, Y, Z, certain size in X markets. We want to be doing this sort of work. We want to be known for this. This is the big thing that we want the market to see us as. Most businesses just don't do that, because they're too caught up in the day to day, and what tends to happen is either they just sort of keep struggling along, or they end up being acquired, and later. And the problem with that is that they're undervalued and underprepared for that event. So that's what I've seen in when I've spoken to people over the years. And in some ways that's true of Iris as well. We were so kind of caught up in our own sort of roller coaster ride and our own cultural issues that you could easily argue that we were a bit underprepared too.
And you guys were obviously acquired in the end. You were acquired by a large global agency, Chael. Yeah. And I'm interested to know, now that you're no longer independent and haven't been for a few years, what's changed? How do you keep the business and the team as high performing as you can?
Yeah, I mean, it's worth just starting with acquisition because our relationship with Chael has been really positive. So I've been working with Chael for 10 years now, and we had a 5-year earnout, and we more or less we achieved what we wanted to in that earnout. Not perfect, but a lot better than most. And we were more or less left alone, and our brand was intact, and how we run our business was intact. So it was pretty positive. There's now some real tensions on the horizon. I mean, obviously, we're in a post-COVID world. We're in an environment where we've had the Great Resignation. We've had a sort of the cultural destruction of Zoom meetings. And we're on. We've got wars. We've got it's like crisis on crisis on crisis, isn't it? And I think now more than ever, it's about leadership, reminding themselves what really matters, and that again takes us back to where we all started around culture, trust, pride, camaraderie, passion, being together on a journey, being together in a caper, and I think that's more about people and the leadership team than it is about incentives, KPIs, and whether they've got equity or not. So I think step one is businesses sort of need to get back into the office, or businesses in our category need to get back into the office, because you need that. You need to see each other. You need to, because you push one another. You come up with things that you wouldn't have before, and frankly, you just enjoy it more. And that I just think that's what we need. We need to get back to enjoying it. It's we're in a sort of incredible industry really, where we're not curing the world's biggest problem, are we? It's meant to be more fun, and the more fun it is, the better at it will be, the more attractive it will be to clients and talent.
Really interesting point there, how over the last few years, work has become less fun than what it once was, and the impact that potentially has with clients.
Yeah, I mean that's true, because in the old days, I remember when I first started in the industry, there was lots of lunches, and the relationships with clients was really tangible, and they were really part of it. And I remember having some great relationships with clients, and it was fun, and it was a bit like we were the most enjoyable bit of their week. So they would love spending time with us, and we sort of need to try to sort of rediscover some of that, because I do think that's the power that entrepreneurs and creative people feed off.
It's a very interesting point. And so when you look around your team and you look at the real superstars within the team, I'm sure entrepreneurial spirit will be something that many of them have in common. What are the other key traits of a high performer within Iris?
I mean, being unreasonable. I like being unreasonable, because you got to stick to your guns. You got to see things through. It's resilience. It's resilience, isn't it? And also being able to be persuasive, because quite often, particularly if you want someone to do something that they've not done before, or just something that's real breakthrough, it does require, you've got to stick to it. You can't just crumble at the first setback. I think playful is another good word, because you've got to make time for fun, and humour is so important as a way of greasing the wheels. I mean, clarity of thought and being transparent, probably, because again, trust is the sort of bedrock that all this is built on. I mean, and team being a team player. I remember I spoke with a gentleman called John Farrell recently, who was the CEO of IMP, which is the business we all broke away from. And I was asking him about how many successful businesses were formed at IMP. Because not only did IMP kind of give birth to Iris, it gave birth to VCCP, Crow, Geronimo, Dynamo, quite a few businesses, FKB. So it was full of pace-setting, entrepreneurially minded, charismatic, talented people, motivated people. And I was asking him if he knew that. And whilst I don't think he kind of saw how this gene pool kind of went on to make a big difference in the industry, what he did know was that it was both competitive and collaborative and supportive at the same time. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. And when he explained it, and there was like a really interesting mix of people. Some were a bit more edgy, and more of a driver mindset. But there was a lot of people who were very supportive and nurturing, collaborative as well. So you had this sort of incredible cocktail that was unbeatable because there were people that really wanted to push themselves out there, but there were loads of other people who were there to like bring others up through the ranks and give opportunities to people, and also not make it so painful and narcissistic that the wheels fell off after a few months.
I think what you're saying is, as well as having that kind of entrepreneurial spirit, there's lots of other kind of behaviors that you would hope people would have and your best performers have, but there's a mix. So we can't have everyone being crazy entrepreneurial. We need some people being a bit more, on the supportive side and kind of sorting things out in the office. And I'm curious, what happens when, and this does happen to us all, when you have some toxic rock stars in the company, people that don't necessarily fit with the culture and maybe cause a few issues?
Yeah, I mean, of course, over our journey, we have made mistakes with talent. I mean, like everybody, and usually what happens is you can see it really quickly, and that doesn't mean that you sort it out quickly. So yeah, I mean, there was a period, roughly 10 years in, where we'd just won an Entrepreneurs Challenge award. We'd then found ourselves taking the bank became a shareholder. The bank also then gave us a load of debt to expand. We managed to win this competition where we pitched. It was like an early Dragon's Den. So we pitched this business plan. We then won it, and then suddenly we found ourselves with this incredible opportunity. And up until this point, all of our expansion had been self-funded. And also driven by backing our own talent. So we were moving from that model, which was relatively slow and modest, to something that was much more kind of macho and and pacey, and risky, So obviously we brought in a couple of individuals that we thought would enable us to do this, and obviously we found that quite quickly it was damaging our leadership culture, and it was damaging the company culture. And going back to the very start of this discussion, that the culture was the power. That was the thing. So if you start damaging that, then you if you don't stop it quickly, you'll end up with nothing. And we obviously gave it a bit of time, but I think quite quickly we realised that we had to change it and go back to how it was, which is luckily for us what we did. But it was an amazing sort of series of learnings for sure. And going back to this thing around journey and destination, it made me tune into the value of the destination, and also made me much more aware of what our shareholders want from being part of Iris. But we were able to straighten this out. But it was the most incredible growth curve I've been on, and I think when we look back on it, it was also incredibly exciting. It was full of crisis and chaos, and I think we as a team can be incredibly proud of getting through it, because it all happened at the same time as the global economic crisis as well. So it was like chaos on chaos on chaos, and I just felt afterwards that we'd learned an incredible amount about ourselves, and also learned a lot about business as well, and what it really takes to make a global business successful.
Another great story. And as you're saying, it's a great learning. Often it's the difficult experiences that you learn the most from. So, yeah, Ian, you've obviously achieved incredible amounts with Iris. Yeah, what a journey. What's next for you?
So I'm currently working with Chael to, I guess, move Iris on into the next phase of its journey, and invest in some of the skill sets that Iris will need to be competitive in the next 25 years. So I'm working really closely with Korea on doing that, and that's really good. And I invested in a few businesses a few years ago, and I enjoy working with those teams. And hopefully I'll carry on, and I can help them benefit from some of my learnings. But yeah, certainly for the next period of time, I'm keen to make sure Iris is equipped to be competitive in its next chapter.
Well, you're talking about the next 25 years. Sounds like you're halfway through that journey.
Yeah, I suppose.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for joining us today. As I said, you've achieved so much. There are many people who've started an agency, and there are very few of them that have grown it to the size and scale of what you've achieved with Iris. So thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you so much for sharing, some of the things that you've done in order to get the business to where it is.
Thank you. It was a team game, and the more I know about myself now, the more I look back on it all. I really do appreciate what a team it was, and what a moment in time it was as well. And I feel very lucky to have been part of it.
You've been listening to Human Powered, the podcast all about creating a high-performing agency or consultancy business. Thanks for tuning in.